Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission meeting. Today is Wednesday, December 17, 2025. There are members attending virtually and members who are present in G3 at the Capitol. Would like to request Ms. Knable to take the roll.
Representative Noor.
Present.
Noor, present. Senator Pratt.
Present.
Pratt, present. Representative Anderson.
Present.
Anderson, present. Senator Dames.
Present.
Dames, present. Senator Marty.
Present.
Marty, present. Representative Perryman.
Present.
Perryman, present. Representative Pinto. Senator Wicklund excused. Representative Pinto. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We have a quorum present. With that, I just wanted to begin with the approval of the minutes for September 3rd, 2025. Vice Chair Pratt, did you want to move the minutes for approval?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move the minutes.
Thank you. Chair Pratt moves the approval of the minutes of September 3rd, 2025. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes for September 3rd, 2025 are now approved. Members, we have an agenda before us, and we wanted to begin with a presentation from Director Lassen. And this is in regards to the Fiscal Note Uniform Standards and Procedures and proposed changes. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Mr. Chair and members, my name is Christian Larson, Director of the Legislative Budget Office. Today I'll be walking you through a couple of proposed changes to the Fiscal Note Uniform Standards and Procedures. Just as a reminder, per Minnesota Statute 3.8853, the Commission will need to approve the proposed updates for them to be effective. The LBO identified the items provided in the proposed updates over the past two sessions. We consulted with fiscal staff in the House and Senate, as well as staff from the Minnesota Management Budget Division in the development of the proposed updates. In your package, you have a copy of the Fiscal Note Uniform Standards and Procedures for your reference. The changes proposed are found in the Assumptions and Estimates Standard and Procedures on page 38 and 39. And for your reference, the proposed changes are both noted and underlined for reference. Just give a moment for everyone to find that document and open it up. So the first change is to the standard for assumptions and estimates. You'll see two paragraphs inserted, kind of paragraph 3 and 4 under the standard for assumptions and estimates. The first paragraph clarifies that in cases where a bill or section of a bill cannot be implemented due to federal laws, rules, or regulations, the agency or state entity replying to the fiscal note request must still submit a fiscal note. The new proposed language states, if an agency determines that a bill or section of a bill cannot be implemented due to federal laws, rules, or regulations, the agency must still complete the fiscal note. The assumption section of the fiscal note must explain the implementation concerns identified by the agency. The fiscal note costs and savings table should include the fiscal effects for the portions of the bill that the agency can implement. And I'll pause there if there's any questions on this addition.
Chair Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Larson. So let's say there were, I think there's a little bit of a conundrum here, and I'm hoping you can clear that up. So if the agency says it can't be implemented, but that's their opinion, and there's a very good chance maybe it could be implemented, the first part of the first part of the paragraph, it sounded like we were requiring them to consider those costs as if it could be implemented. Now we're saying, but it won't; those costs won't be included in the summary, or are we still asking them to estimate what those costs would be, regardless of their implementation ability, so that if it weren't to be implemented, we could easily back those costs out or back those savings out?
Director Lassen.
Chair Noor and Vice Chair Pratt. So this language would require the agency to so long as they can define for the LBO that this cannot be implemented per federal regulation, they can point to it and say this is the law and it cannot be implemented, or here's the federal rules that say this cannot be implemented, then they would not carry those costs in the fiscal note. They would state in the assumptions that this language can't be implemented because of X reason, and would still need to complete the fiscal note stating as such so that the legislature has the information that says there isn't inherently a cost or a revenue or whatever else it might be, a fiscal impact, because it cannot be implemented. There is the next paragraph discusses a situation where maybe an agency thinks it might be challenged or might be challenged in the courts, in which case we suggest that it does need to be completed, that you can't assume a future legal challenge. This isn't a case where the agency can say this cannot be implemented because of law X, and we're confident in that.
Vice Chair Pratt.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and Mr. Larson, I'm just kind of looking, it says if an agency determines that a bill or a section of a bill, so if I have a section of the bill, then we would expect that the rest of the bill be costed out and included. But if it's the entire bill and we're still requiring a fiscal note, I guess I'm a little concerned that it says that they only have to include the fiscal effects of the portion of the bill that the agency can implement. But if the entire bill is unimplementable, if that's a word, then how do we expect a fiscal note, but then nothing's in the summary, or there's no assumption, there's no cost assumptions in the summary. They're just talking about why it can't be implemented.
Director Lassen.
Chair Noor and Vice Chair Pratt. So our interpretation of this is that you would still have a fiscal note. So the LBO would review the fiscal note and quite honestly have a comment that says the agency is not carrying any fiscal impact because they cannot implement the bill. We would still approve the fiscal note for that reason, and the assumptions would then carry from the agency's perspective why that's not implementable. That's how we interpret that this language be applied.
Senator Daines.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would be, it seems like we have a problem getting fiscal notes done in many cases as the session progresses because we get so busy and there's so many requests for fiscal notes. So if we have a bill that is entirely not implementable, why would we have them do a fiscal note when it can't be implemented? Why would we not have them move on to something else that's in line to be, that we need a fiscal note for?
Director Lassen.
Chair Noor and Senator Daines, thank you for the question. So it's been our experience that sometimes there's a portion of a law that can't be implemented, and so that the rest of the information is still useful for the legislature, and also it's the LBO's perspective that it's still useful information for the legislature to know that that law can't be implemented, that's documented, but the rest of the information is available to the legislature. Likely the agency has spent time reviewing that law already, so the majority of the time kind of spent on that development or not development has already taken place. Now it's just entering information saying we can't implement for a reason X, Y, and Z. But I do think it's a reasonable concern, and I would say agencies have raised concerns with us on this topic because we have carried this assumption in the standard, so this is really a clarification of something we have already put in place. So agencies have come forward to us and said, we don't think this is a good practice in that if language isn't implementable, we don't want an official document saying that it does or doesn't have a cost. And so that's the other side of this, is that perhaps that is the reason that we can make a standard clearly that states that in situations where an agency has determined a bill not implementable, it doesn't need to be completed. That could be the other option, the alternative to this language.
Senator Daines.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Norman.
Mr. Chair, maybe just as a matter of clarification, I intend this as a question for Mr. Larson. I believe that statute requires the LBO to deliver a fiscal note whenever one requested by the legislature. And so I think at some level, this issue deals with that question, that if an agency has the authority to punch out and say, there is a component of this fiscal note that is not implementable, and we're not going to complete the fiscal note, I think that's a problem for the legislature. If it doesn't, then if the agency is saying we can't deliver a fiscal note because there's a component of this that is not implementable, this clarifies the standards that this body believes that even that circumstance should result in a completed fiscal note, albeit one that says, here, there are some components that are not legally implementable, to use just one example. And if I'm wrong about that interpretation, I'm sure Mr. Larson will correct me.
Director Lassen.
Your Honor, members, Mr. Allen, that's correct. That is under statute, the strictest reading of a statute is that a request is an active request and should be completed. And certainly, there's always work within the legislative process where we're prioritizing and doing that type of thing at certain points in session. But the assumption is if an active request is active, that we're working to complete that note.
Mr. Norman. Any further questions? Nope. You may proceed.
The second paragraph addresses assumptions around any possible future litigation from passing a law. So this is the second additional paragraph, so the second underlined paragraph in the standard on that page 38. It states, technical comments related to potential litigation challenging the legal validity of a bill can be included in the fiscal note narrative, but cannot be included in the estimated cost included in the fiscal note expenditures tables. Again, I'll pause for any questions.
Any questions on this section? Vice Chair Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're just saying they can't include the cost to defend it, but they would be able to include the costs of the underlying policy that might cause that challenge, right?
Director Larson.
Chair Noor, Vice Chair Pratt, that's correct.
Any further questions? No further discussion. Please proceed.
So if you move on to page 39, you'll find under Procedure 10, again, another noted and underlined statement. That is additional added language. And this procedure gives guidance on assumptions for the funding source for bills expanding existing programs. It states, if the program is an expansion of activity currently occurring, the fiscal note should assume the current funding source for the same or new related activity or program, unless otherwise stated in the bill language. If the funding source is not identified in the bill language and this activity does not currently exist, the fiscal note should assume general fund. If there are questions regarding the funding source, please consult with your LBO analyst and your executive budget officer of your agency. Again, I'll pause for any questions.
Any discussions on that section? Hearing none, please proceed.
And that concludes the presentation of the Uniform Standards and Procedure updates.
Members, any discussions before we move the approval of the Uniform Standards and Procedures?
No, Mr. Chair, no, I think they're reasonable. Sounds like it's been practiced anyway, so a little bit.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Did you want to move the motion for the adoption?
I move adoption of the two changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Anderson moves to approve the Legislative Budget Office Fiscal Note Uniform Standards and Procedures. LBO staff are authorized to make technical corrections to the standards and procedures document prior to publication on the LBO website. Any further discussions? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, we need a roll call vote because we have folks online. Apologies.
Thank you. Ms. Schnabel, please take the roll call.
Representative Noor.
Aye.
Noor votes aye. Senator Pratt.
Aye.
Pratt votes aye. Representative Anderson.
Aye.
Anderson votes aye. Senator Dames. Aye. Dames votes aye. Senator Marty.
Aye.
Marty votes aye. Representative Perryman.
Aye.
Perryman votes aye. Representative Pinto.
Aye.
Pinto votes aye. Senator Wicklund excused. 7 ayes, 1 excused.
With 7 ayes, the changes are now adopted. To the next agenda item. Director Larson, please proceed with the second section of the agenda.
Chair Noor and members, again, my name is Christian Larson, Director of the Legislative Budget Office. I've been asked to present on an analysis that would evaluate the accuracy of fiscal estimates of fiscal notes and other budget items impacting the Minnesota legislature. You have a set of slides in your packet, as well as they're presented on the screen. In today's presentation, I'll walk through 3 things. First, we'll look at just what is a fiscal note and budget item follow-up report. I'll talk about kind of generally what is included in such an analysis. We'll look at what other states are performing this type of analysis, and we'll provide some considerations for the Oversight Commission regarding this type of analysis. So the first question really is, what is a fiscal note and budget item follow-up report. Really, it's just a variance analysis comparing budget figures to actual fiscal impacts. So we're saying, here's the fiscal note estimate, here's what actually took place, and just comparing and why is that. They generally include a description of the law, the original budget estimate, the actual fiscal impacts, a discussion of the cause of the variance, and then if a third party is developing it, for example, if the legislative budget officer to do this type of analysis, they generally allow for the agency to provide in response to the analysis provided by the legislative budget officer, whoever is providing that report. The question then is what is accomplished in this type of analysis? And really there's three things that are generally seen as the rationale for producing this type of evaluation. The first is to improve the accuracy of similar estimates going forward, generally to improve the fiscal note process. So if we can look back and say estimates on similar things played out like this, we can use that information moving forward, both for internal reviews within the legislative budget office and for agencies as they develop the estimates. It informs the legislature on the accuracy of particular budget items. So if there's a certain item of interest for the legislature, they might have an interest in looking at a specific program that was implemented, had a particular fiscal estimate. They could get that information on that specific program. And finally, it develops a level of accountability both for the legislative budget office and for the state entities developing fiscal estimates and fiscal notes and other budget estimates. If we think about kind of the current process, the legislative budget office is good at measuring volume of fiscal notes. We know how many are coming in and when they come in and things of that nature. We have somewhat of a decent measure of timeliness. We can measure how quickly they're completed, kind of the average days or the median days to complete a fiscal note. We can look at how many are completed by a set due date in the system, so long as that's some kind of reasonable measure of need date. We don't really have by committee date necessarily, but we have some good measures for timeliness. But what we don't really have is really strong measures of the accuracy of the things that we're signing off on and saying are reasonable fiscal estimates for the legislature. So this would allow for that to take place. So what's this look like in other states? We worked with the National Conference of State Legislatures to see where this is happening in other places. And there was a survey completed around 2020. The information hasn't been updated since then. So the most recent information we have is from 2020. And at that time, 23 states responded to the National Conference of State Legislatures, or NCSL, and so they do some type of variance analysis for their budget estimates, with the vast majority being kind of ad hoc, upon special request or informal processes of review. So it might be that a particular member has an interest in a particular budget item, they'll go ask fiscal staff and they'll do an analysis of the estimate versus what actually took place. Or it might happen through the biennial budget process or their annual budget process or whatever it might be, where they say, well, we want to get a better estimate of that program now. Can we get a new budget estimate on that or something of that nature? But it's not really a formalized report. 2 states do have a formalized report through their legislature. We found at least one other state that does this through the executive branch, where a report is required from their kind of central budget office. But in terms of where this is handled through the legislature, 2 states do that, and those are Utah and Tennessee. So we'll walk through examples from those states. Also want to point to a piloted report from the Legislative Budget Office in 2022. We took on an analysis of this type in 2022. We haven't followed up since that time, but we did pilot something like that a few years back. So if we look in other states, the Utah Legislative Fiscal Analyst, the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst produces an annual report. Their report is generally really high level. They look at over 200 budget items per year. It's an interactive digital report. It gives a really high-level table and then a little bit of a detail, but for the most part, this is a really high-level summary of information. So they're doing a lot of laws, but at a very high level. And they generally review items either mostly from the previous year, like most of the things that passed in the year, and see where that is a year later, but they will go back 2 or 3 years. And this is kind of what it looks like if you see an example on your screen. But generally, you can see they have some identifying information. So what law passed, who requested that this particular item be reviewed. And then they have some funding information. Was it, how was the appropriation set up? Was it one-time, ongoing, supplemental? They have some high-level information about the implementation level. So is it partially implemented, fully implemented, not yet implemented, things of that nature. They look at the spending variance, so how much was actually spent compared to what was appropriated, discuss that at a very high level. And then they have something called performance measure, which is really just a key driver or key indicator for driving the fiscal effect for that program. So think of things like individuals enrolled, grants paid, things of that nature. And so they try to give a really high level description of this is why there's a variance within this estimate. They also provide recommendations from the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst and then an agency response related to that appropriation. So that's how Utah handles this. We have another example from Tennessee. It's called the Tennessee Public Chapter Review, and that's required by statute. So the Utah report isn't anywhere described in statute, it's just something that was identified and to be useful, and so that was moved forward and produced annually. The Tennessee Public Chapter Review is in statute that requires at least 5 Tennessee laws per report per year be reviewed by the Tennessee Fiscal Review Committee staff. And they review items enacted in the last 5 years, and that's also in statute. So what their report looks like is a static report. It is much of the information similar in terms of what you have. It's just a little bit more detail. So they have, again, some identifying information. So what law are they reviewing? A quick description of that law, the fiscal estimate, and the assumptions used in developing the original estimate. Oops. Then they have the actual expenses, and then the main drivers of that in a brief description of why, what was the difference between the assumptions, the underlying assumptions in the original estimate and the actual expenses. So that's how Tennessee handles it. And then again, in 2022, the Legislative Budget Office piloted a similar report, quite honestly, very much based on the Tennessee example. And so we'll walk through that. Again, some identifying information in the LBO's post-enactment review, what law, then a quick description, bill summary, followed by the appropriated amount, the fiscal note estimate, and the actual fiscal impacts, and then a formalized look at that variance. Then it has an FTE table. If you think about the Minnesota Fiscal Note, that has a special table for FTE, so we can look at that. Our analysis included a table looking at the FTE variance, and then it had some analysis of what were the underlying assumptions and what changed in the actual output, if anything. And then we provided a space for agencies to respond with any kind of response or feedback based on the report provided. So that's what was provided from the Legislative Budget Office in 2022. So the final piece I wanted to walk you through here today was considerations for future analysis. And if we were to move forward with such analysis, or if the Commission would consider this type of analysis, what are things that are important to consider? The first, I think, is who would be in charge of selecting the items reviewed? Is it the LBO? So in Tennessee, it's on the nonpartisan staff to identify those and determine those, and that's what we did in 2022 through consultation with House and Senate nonpartisan staff and things of that nature. Should it be the LBO Oversight Commission? Should there be an annual review process that says, here's a list of items that we think would be useful for review? Is it, if we think about the OLA process, there's certainly a survey of the greater legislature. That's also an option if we think about what's done in Minnesota and other spaces in a similar vein, but certainly different analysis. So that's one thing to consider is who's selecting what gets reviewed. And then the question is, should it be limited to fiscal notes? So the Legislative Budget Office's statutory authority is fiscal notes, local impact notes, and tax expenditure review commission support. If we would go anything beyond that, things like governor's budget recommendations, which don't always inherently have a fiscal note, but sometimes do, revenue estimates handled through the Department of Revenue under separate statute, or budget items that may be appropriate at the end of session that didn't have time to go through the official fiscal note process, should those things also be included in such an analysis? Is, I think, a worthwhile consideration for the Commission. Another consideration, should there be some type of formalized process or statement that this is a required, certainly statute could be developed that says this report is required by the Legislative Budget Office or whoever would then develop this analysis. You could consider putting it in the Uniform Standards and Procedures if it's specifically around the fiscal note process and say, here's a required analysis to support the development of fiscal notes. One note on that, if it was handled through the USPs or the Uniform Standards and Procedures, current statute regarding LBO authority for data is specific to the development of fiscal notes. It's in the development of a fiscal note, the LBO has access to that data. So that would be consideration if it was handled through the Uniform Standards and Procedures. We'll say in our experience in 2022, we met with CFOs and agencies and tried to kind of discuss challenges and whatever else this analysis might look like. And there was, we didn't have a lot, I mean, certainly they had concerns and thoughts about different things, but we got the information as we tried to develop the report. And so that wasn't inherently a roadblock, but there's no formal authority in statute that says the LBO would have access to that information if it wanted it. And then the final, I guess that's not the final consideration, but another consideration is what resources would be required. So anytime we think about an additional work product of this type, the resources necessary, both from the state agency perspective and from the legislative budget office. The intent, as much as possible, would certainly be, in our case, for the LBO to go forward and pull as much information as we can from the financial system or whatever else it is and say, can we put information forward that is, that we're doing a lot of the legwork on the front side and not putting as much pressure on the agencies. But in terms of how things actually get implemented, what's really driving those underlying fiscal effects, certainly that information is held within the agencies and other state entities responding to fiscal notes. And so there is some resource impact on agencies, and depending on the complexity of the program, could be relatively substantial. Certainly there's also resources from the LBO's perspective. Certainly the number of items reviewed per year would impact the number of resources from the LBO, things of that nature. So those are also considerations. And the final piece of consideration for the commission to think about is, what's the preferred format for such an analysis? As the LBO has been thinking about this type of analysis, there's really a few different ways we had thought could be produced. The first is what we had originally produced in 2022 and what we saw in Tennessee, which is like a regular report produced by a certain date where it's we look at X amount of items. It's all in one report and published and sent out to the legislature kind of in a regular static format. You could have more of a brief format. Think about like House Research and Senate Council Research and Fiscal Briefs, where it comes out, a topic's reviewed. It's not part of a bigger report of materials, just it's a standalone single item. You could review a particular fiscal note and implemented law, complete a brief on it, submit that to the legislature as they're ready. That's an option as an alternative to like a single report released all at the same time. The final option, which is, again, not produced in other states, this would be kind of as far as we're aware, a little bit of a new and kind of different take on this type of analysis is you could focus the analysis on a particular topic across fiscal notes. And so maybe you're pulling out a particular, something like FTE costs and fiscal notes or IT costs and fiscal notes or reports or commissions or something that's generally repeated in the fiscal note process, and you're looking across fiscal notes on one particular topic as opposed to a whole way through a fiscal note and catching every single one of those kind of items is another option to consider as a different type of information you might collect that could influence the future quality of fiscal notes. And from there, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Director Larson. Members, any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Anderson.
My comment is just that this is complicated, and we should probably think about this and discuss this with the staff to try to figure out what the best way is to go about this, so, rather than make a decision today, though.
Thank you so much. We're not making any decision today. This is for future considerations as we look through, and I think it gets a little bit complicated when we have got unspent funds and carry forward and so many other things that come into play. And so not necessarily an easy task, because we also, usually as legislators, we request information about specific programs and get it directly from the agencies. Vice Chair Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me just compliment Director Larson and his staff for putting this together, because I think it's a really good idea. As we start talking about, we've all complained about the quality of fiscal notes over the last several years. And I think this is a good way for legislators to make sure that, we can take what we learn from these and apply that to the assumptions that we see in future fiscal notes. I think it's also a very good way for us to be transparent with the public. Because it looks like, if I'm correct, these are reports that are online and available for general consumption. Am I right or wrong on that?
Director Larson.
Sure, no, Vice Chair Pratt. That would be correct.
Yeah. So I think anytime we can help state government be more transparent to the people that we serve, I think it's a good thing. I agree with Representative Anderson in that I think we have to be very careful because there's a fine balance between being thorough and being complicated. And you don't have to pass a test to be a legislator, so we have to make it, we have to dumb it down for us a little bit. And I think we have to make it simple for the public to be able to view and understand that as well, but not so simple that you're trying to jump to conclusions that aren't warranted. So I think it's going to be a fine balance as you go through this, if this is something that we need to do. But I fully support the concept if we can make it work. And I'm glad to see that there's a couple of other states that are doing it. So we've got some templates to work from, so at least we're not reinventing the wheel, so to speak, but building upon the good work that somebody else has done, and hopefully ours is a little bit better and copied by another state. So thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Any further discussion? Well, it's a great tool to have. So I think we did for other bills, and maybe we can take a look and see how we can improve it, and hopefully further discussion in the future meetings that we'll have. Seeing no further discussion, do you have any closing remarks, Director Larson?
No, Chair Nor.
All right, now we move to the local impact notes. We'll have a presentation on that, local impact notes. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed, Mr. Anderson.
Good afternoon, Chair Knorr and members. For the record, my name is Joel Enders with the Legislative Budget Office. For reference, the presentation slides and memo describing local impact note options can be found in your packet. The memo was created in response to member concerns regarding the timeliness of local impact notes. The current process can take several weeks to several months depending on the scope and complexity of bill language, which means notes are often completed during the interim instead of during session. The LBO has identified 4 alternatives to the current local impact note process from an analysis of other state programs. The alternatives presented here are for member discussion, and the LBO can follow up with more research, program details, or potential formats if there is interest. For reference, during the last 3 sessions, 11 local impact notes have been requested. These requests are often made for complex legislation such as the legalization of adult use cannabis or city minimum residential housing densities. This presentation will briefly summarize the current local impact note process, then go over each alternative with a focus on the strengths and weaknesses of each option. The current local impact note process begins when a chair or ranking minority member of a tax committee, the Senate Finance Committee, or the Ways and Means Committee requests a local impact note. The LBO then sends formal request notifications and works to identify potential data sources. Surveys are often used to request estimates or solicit data from local governments. Collected data and survey results are then used to develop an estimate or a range of fiscal impacts. A completed local impact note is fairly comprehensive and includes an executive summary, bill description, a discussion of methodology and data limitations, a comparison of similar programs in other states, a literature review, survey summary, and analysis of fiscal impacts. Completed reports are distributed to the requester, bill authors, committee chairs, and minority leads to which the bill has been referred, nonpartisan fiscal staff, and posted on the LBO website. The strengths of the current process are depth and thoroughness. This format allows for a nuanced discussion of potential impacts even when data is limited or not available. On the other hand, it can take several weeks to several months to complete a local impact note. Survey design, distribution, and collection often takes up the bulk of this time. So with that in mind, let's take a quick look at 4 alternatives to the current process. The first option is a cross-section analysis. Local impact note requests received during session would be communicated to volunteer local governments recruited before the start of each session. These volunteers would analyze requests and submit a fiscal impact statement by a specified due date. The LBO would develop guidelines and training materials to help streamline these responses. The LBO would then submit a response summary, trend analysis, and individual responses to the requester and relevant committees. This option is anticipated to take around 10 to 15 business days to complete, depending on bill complexity. This option would provide timely information direct from local governments, and a formalized process would be faster than administering surveys that are unique to each note request. However, it may be difficult to consistently recruit a representative cross-section of local governments, and some elements of the current process, like the literature review, may need to be omitted or scaled down for the sake of timeliness. A second option is a local impact brief, essentially a shortened 3 to 6 page document that would be similar in format to the executive summary provided in current local impact notes. The LBO would use available data and consult with local governments and associations. However, formal surveys, literature reviews, and comparisons of similar programs in other states would be scaled down or omitted for the sake of timeliness. The turnaround time for a local impact brief would be around 8 business days, depending on bill complexity and data availability. This option would provide timely information in a concise, need-to-know format, but a local impact brief would have less depth than the current process. A third option would be an annual report on previously enacted bills that would include an impact analysis of selected bills, comments from local governments and associations, and copies of related fiscal notes, if any. Bills could be selected for the annual report if they meet certain criteria, or a certain number of bills could be selected by each caucus, or bills could be selected by the Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission. This option would provide local impact analyses on a fixed timeline and only on enacted bills. However, local impact notes would not be provided during session, and the depth of analysis could vary depending on the number of bills selected and the complexity of each bill. The last option is an annual report on contemplated legislation. Legislators would request local impact analyses for the upcoming session by a specified date, and the LBO would use draft bill or policy language to develop impact estimates using the current process. Completed analyses would be published in an annual report prior to the beginning of each session. Each caucus could request about 3 to 4 local impact estimates annually, assuming draft bill or policy language is of roughly the same scope and complexity as requests that have been made over the last 3 sessions. With this option, local impact information would be available at the start of each session. However, this system would be less responsive to bills drafted shortly before or during session, and legislators may not be aware of bills with potential local impacts before a session begins. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on the current process or any of the 4 alternatives presented today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anders. Any questions or comments, members? Vice Chair Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking a look at this. You know, when I came into the legislature and we had bills that clearly had local impact, I think it was an eye-opener for me to realize how long the current process takes. And part of it is I, as a legislator, want to have that information as the bill is going through the process in a timely manner. I guess with that in mind, do you have a recommendation on which of these would probably meet the needs of the legislature if the idea is to have that information at the time that the bill's going through the Committee of Jurisdiction and the Finance Committee?
Mr. Anders.
Chair Norris, Senator Pratt, I don't think the LBO has a specific option in mind that one would be better than the other. I think they all have their strengths and weaknesses. I think bringing it before the commission, the thought was to kind of gauge interest and then kind of move forward with more, perhaps more research or, mocking up what a document could look like or something like that for further discussion down the road.
Vice Chair Prime.
Mr. Chair, I think this is a good idea. I think if the LBO is looking for some guidance on whether or not to pursue it, I think we should. Again, when I look at some of the bills that we've asked for local impact on, it looks like a bipartisan list of requests, and I think all of them would have been good to have at the point in time that we were contemplating passage, and whatever we can do to get that voice of local governments and the impacts that we're having on them into the decision-making process is good.
Thank you. Chair Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like seeing this report. It was very helpful to see some alternatives, and I guess I am intrigued by several of them. The one thing I just wanted to add, and it's not directly related to this, but I think somewhere in one of the meetings I've had with some LBOOC members or maybe LBO staff or something, is that I think a number of legislators are interested in knowing whether state or federal or whoever's policies, what impacts they're having on local governments, because we obviously have a stake in making sure their budgets are okay. But I'm not sure that I have anything to add with that, just because actually finding out impacts of other changes in society or at the federal level have huge impacts on local governments, as I think we're hearing from a lot of them right now about property tax impacts. But that's a slightly different issue, but I just wanted to keep that in the mix as we as a commission start thinking about some of these alternatives. And again, that may not be in any way applicable. Maybe we can't do anything about it, but just wanted to at least keep that alive as an idea to talk about.
I think you're right, Chair Marty. The same question that I have is there's so many changes that are coming through HR 1, which will increase the cost to the counties. And likewise, I just wanted to inquire about the recent requirement for the state of Minnesota to recertify almost all SNAP recipient. That order just came in from the federal government. As we know that we are one of 10 states that are state supervised, county administered. I don't know if there's anyone who can provide us, because that will have a significant impact on local government, which is not quantified in any legislative process. Vice Chair Prime.
Go ahead, Mr. Norman.
Mr. Norman.
Mr. Chair and Senator Pratt, just trying to think through your question previously on the recommendation on which would be preferred. And I heard the LBO very clearly say each one suffers from some pros and cons, as many things that we do here. I think in my experience, the legislature wants to use the local impact note as a decision-making tool. So that means thorough analysis that is timely and responsive to the legislative process. Those are three tall asks for the timeline and just the nature of the fiscal federalism that our system operates in. It seems like the cross-sectional analysis with some significant shortcomings gets you closest to something that is responsive and analytical based on feedback from local governments. And I once again, I'm making that as a statement, but I'm intending it more as a question to see whether the LBO agrees on this. Like, I think it would be worth having a conversation here about how responsive to the legislative need. Is my premise correct, that that's how you're thinking about it, Senator Pratt? And if I'm not, then maybe something that is either prospective or retrospective, as per items 3 and 4 would do, might be helpful. If you have a proposed piece of legislation in your responsibilities as ranking member of finance, maybe there's a list of ideas that you would like on behalf of your caucus to have run through the local impact note process, and maybe that would be responsive. It would not deal with the question of, whoops, we want to amend something along the way, and now the bill can be significantly different, and now the pricing that you got from the local government at the point in time before session is no longer reflective of what the pricing actually would be in a bill that would be finalized. So to my way of thinking, the cross-sectional analysis probably gets you the closest, but there's going to be a lot of issues associated with, is the data set as comprehensive as you would need to get a thorough analysis? So a lot of musings there, but I just think it might be worth having this commission think through the shortcomings and benefits of each.
Vice Chair Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me, I had a different question, but let me address Mr. Nauman's thoughts here first. And I appreciate that. So often there's a trade-off between time and thoroughness, right? And I think at one point we said of all the surveys we send out, we maybe get a third back. Does that sound about right?
Chair Knorr,
Mr. Ennis.
Senator Pratt, historically, it's between 31 and 36%, so right around there.
So
Vice Chair Pratt.
we're kind of at a cross-section already, Mr. Chair, as that goes. I do remember that, and Mr. Nauman and I have talked about whether or not this was an appropriate use or not, but I had a partial local impact that we were able to use as part of the debate. And quite honestly, we were probably 85% of what the local impact note would have given us as far as what the cost and the impact would be. Wasn't perfect, but it at least was there in at a time when we could have it as part of the debate that we were discussing. And so I think as we move along, we have to have that discussion. I don't want this process to fail because we're looking for the perfect solution. I guess, from my corporate days, 85% was usually a pretty good confidence level to be able to go into something. And if the CEO ever called you on it, you say, well, it was a rounding error. So that was, I appreciate it. I guess I'm more interested in the timeliness and being able to have it as a decision-making tool. But I like the idea of going out and maybe finding some of the non-fiscal impacts, whether that's on, and what I'm thinking there, Mr. Now, well, or maybe some that we haven't considered, like overtime, or, I'm going to have to make some capital investments, things that wouldn't necessarily be at the top of mind. My other question, though, Mr. Chair, I think goes to the comments that you and Senator Marty made. It's my understanding that the local impact notes typically are on state bills. And I don't think we've ever done a local impact note based on federal changes in the past. Those are usually picked up in the forecast. And I'd ask the LBO or Ms. Mingy, is that usually right? And would we ever contemplate a prospective local impact note on federal changes?
Assistant Commissioner Mink.
So Chair Knorr, I think you're correct that the local impact note statute is about the impact of proposed state legislation on local governments. Generally, because the costs are to local governments rather than the state, they're also not something that is captured in the state budget forecast. And I think that's just a challenge of like major federal legislation and sort of the state supervised, county administered system, is that there are potentially significant but diffuse impacts that we don't have a standardized process for capturing within state government.
So Vice Chair Pratt, I think technically those issues will not be captured in a fiscal note because it's being paid for by the local governments, which is the counties. And I think we're even including right now, as we're required to do the reviews, it's not the state agency that is doing the direct reviews. It's being done directly by the counties. So that is a shift of the cost to them, although it's a requirement to the state. So those are things that we may not capture in any fiscal note. It's a burden to the counties. We also know about all the system issues and so many other things. And I think that is something to consider as we go forward, because I've seen many instances within the human services and other areas where the counties will come back and say, this will create an X amount of cost to us. So the cost shifting that is coming directly, whether it's from the federal government or from the state legislation, may not be reflected in a fiscal note. Assistant Commissioner Mendy.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add a little bit of nuance to what I previously said. Was there are places where federal law might require the state to amend state law, and then that could have a corresponding impact on local governments, which could be picked up in a local impact note. So,
Any further discussions? I think this is a topic of further discussion to come up with a plan, because we want to make sure that local governments have got a voice in this process, and we're not shifting cost, which will end up showing up on their property taxes. And I think that has been a conversation we've seen right now, the rise of the property taxes across the state, and it's a good conversation to have. Any closing remarks?
Chair Nord, no.
Thank you, Mr. Anders. So we move on to the next conversation. I think we will be, we have got some public testifiers before I proceed to the next section.
Hi, everybody. At discretion of the chair, is it okay?
Please have a seat and
Is it okay for me to stand here, or do I have to kneel?
I don't know if it's going to be captured directly by the media group. If that is okay, you can proceed.
Okay, and then also, can I keep my hat on?
Yes, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you. My name is Rick Hiller. Unofficially represent Twice Exceptional. Some of the people in this room know what that is. Minnesota Statute 120B15. There's a bill out there in the House. It's called 3311. Might bring some light to that, since autism is being looked at by the feds and a few others this year as far as programming. I also unofficially represent the people with print disabilities. Minnesota Statute Voting Law 203B 29 Subdivision 2. That was put in 2023 in voting law. However, education doesn't quite get there. I come to testify again today. The Legislative Budget Office Commission, I have testified before. And the feedback I'd like to give today, with permission of the chair, that I would have 1 more minute than 2 minutes. I was expressed 2 minutes only. But again, at discretion of the chair, you can always cut me off at the end. The specific thing, since you're talking about the how to roll this uniform standards out, since web content accessibility guide is a Minnesota legislature statute now for digital accessibility that happened on October 15th of I guess it would be, was it this year or last year? Anyhow, that's kind of relevant to how people acquire information effectively. So if we want to go down to something quickly, plain language. In 2015 and 2016, the legislature mandated the Minnesota Department of Education to set the special education forms. online, they did say the legislature did it. They did it for people with, quote, reading disabilities. It was much more than that. If anybody was here would know that. Also, they set the text complexity. When we adopted the Common Core Language Arts Standards, we decided to get rid of degree of power reading for the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment and go with Lexile, basically a new reading metric. They decided to set an 8th grade Lexile. You might, your group might consider applying that to the content for understanding. Not to dumb it down, but if people so-called have DYS abilities, how do we effectively communicate with them since we've gone digital? The other one you could check with is your ex-official, Judy Randall. They have a criteria when they select people, or like they're going to do autism this year, how they decide what's feasible, what's relevant, but they don't include timeliness. And I know it sounded like Senator Pratt was bringing that up about timeliness and how that all comes together, especially when you're running it through fiscal notes and those kind of policies. So that's one other piece I'd like to suggest. And then the two handouts, I did review the handouts, and you did fine on the one that was created by your office. However, there's 2 public handouts, and one of the things problematic about public handouts, and Ms. Urick, the LCC director, did mention in the Senate operations when that bill came through for the legislature applying digital accessibility, when they approved it in October 15th, Cane Blind Day. Anyhow, she did say it's problematic for third parties bringing documents down here and not knowing about digital accessibility. So that's something else you might want to consider when you have your intended audience, who you're entertaining, and so people can perhaps have a moment to testify. I appreciate the extra time to testify. I'm always open to other suggestions regarding this, and thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kerr, for your testimony. Any questions for the testimony?
If I may express, typically I start out that say I'm a white male, about 6 foot, with a beard and a camouflage hat and a brown coat. I typically do that, but I haven't done that. I appreciate you allowing me to speak one more time on that, to kind of give a narrative, because we won't get that online or in Zoom. And I did suggest to Jim Melby about when you have Zoom, that people have an opportunity to do Zoom instead of have to come down here. It's just something that if you had create your own guidelines and rules on accessibility, on how you're going to do Zoom, you could be an example for all the other, perhaps the other commissions, to set an example how you want to roll that out. Thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. Members, do you have any further discussion? Hearing none. The next meeting will be scheduled on January 22nd, 1 p.m. this room. One of the agenda items will be about the dynamic scoring in fiscal notes, which will be presented by NCSL staff. So that will be part of the presentation. And hopefully we will have more conversation about other items that we just discussed. With that, we don't have any further agenda items. We are now adjourned.